Operation Iraqi Freedom, how it affected the Yazidis. In March 2003, the United States invaded Iraq to overthrow the regime of Saddam Hussein. As we know, there were many reasons for this, but in this case we will not touch on the topic of why the United States invaded Iraq. The question here is more about how the Yazidis lived under Saddam and after him. Saddam's rule, to put it mildly, cannot be called democratic. He kept all citizens in check and did not give free rein to separatism and the opposition. As for the Yazidis, they also faced a number of problems. The Yazidis lived in isolation and had their own villages, and many of their villages were destroyed by Saddam's regime. The Baathists created collective villages and forcibly relocated the Yazidis from their historical villages, which were destroyed. According to Human Rights Watch, the Yazidis were in the process of Arabization under Saddam Hussein between 1970 and 2003. In 2009, some Yazidis who had previously lived in this process complained that the Kurds were forcing the Yazidis to identify themselves as Kurds. Like many, the Yazidis hoped that peace and prosperity would come to Iraq after the overthrow of Saddam's regime, but as usually happens, the desired collided with reality. I want to make a small lyrical digression of the events before the U.S. invasion of Iraq. There were quite a few opponents in the United States who warned that a number of other problems would appear with the fall of Saddam's regime. I would like to draw your attention to the fact that numerous experts, including Bush's advisor, General Brent Scowcroft, former Commander-in-Chief of the Central Command of the U.S. Armed Forces Anthony Zinni, and some other senior military officials spoke about the huge risks associated with the fall of the regime in a country with a complex ethno-confessional structure. The ethno-confessional factor was practically ignored on the agenda of the invasion of Iraq, which brought instability and activity of radical Islamic groups to this region. One of the representatives of the national minority of Iraq, a representative of the Chaldean Church, described the situation after the fall of Saddam's regime as follows: various terrorist groups immediately appeared, the influence of Muslim religious movements increased. Minorities in Baghdad, Basra, Mosul, especially the Mandaeans and Yazidis, were subjected to terrible persecution. They had to abandon their homes and property. Those who sold alcohol were attacked by religious fanatics. Many priests were killed along with their families. It would not be an exaggeration to say that this was the most terrible period in the modern history of Iraq. It is difficult to say what could have happened to the Yazidis if Saddam's regime had not collapsed. On the other hand, under Saddam's regime, the Yazidis could have been assimilated with other peoples of Iraq in vain, and today we could have had a completely different result. One thing can be emphasized for sure, that the short-sightedness of the military Operation Iraqi Freedom brought only a dark future, both for the Yazidis and for the region as a whole.